I never told my wife I owned a $45 million family business. 3 days after our wedding, her mom arrived with legal papers and said it's time to hand it over. I laughed, then called my lawyer. I, 31 grew up watching my father build a manufacturing business from a single rented warehouse. By the time I was 16, he had 3 factories, 2 distribution centers, and contracts with companies most people use every single day. He never talked about money at home. We drove normal cars. We lived in a nice house, sure, but nothing that screamed wealth. My father believed that the moment people know what you're worth, they stop seeing you and start seeing your wallet. That lesson saved my life. He passed away when I was 26. Heart attack, no warning. One morning he was reviewing quarterly numbers, and by lunch, he was gone. My mother had already passed from cancer 2 years before that. I was an only child. Everything came to me. The business, the properties, the accounts, all of it. The lawyers told me the total valuation sat around $45 million, and honestly I didn't even process that number for months. I was too busy grieving and trying to figure out how to run a company I'd only ever watched from the outside. I hired the right people. I leaned on my father's old partners. I kept my head down and learned. Within 2 years, the business was stable and growing. But I made one decision early on that shaped everything that came after. I kept my ownership completely private. On paper, the company was held through a family trust. My name didn't appear on any public filing. I didn't update my social media. I kept driving my used car and living in a modest apartment. To the outside world, I was just a guy with a decent job in operations at some company nobody had heard of. That's the version of me my wife met. We started dating about 3 years ago. I met her through a mutual friend at a birthday dinner. She was funny, sharp, had this confidence that I found genuinely attractive. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm and seemed to have her life together. We clicked instantly. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't testing her. Not at first. I just didn't talk about money, because that's how I was raised. My apartment was clean, but simple. I cooked at home. I didn't wear expensive brands. When we went out, we split things or took turns paying. She never once questioned my financial situation, and I took that as a good sign. Maybe I was naive. About a year into the relationship, I started noticing things. Small things that didn't register as red flags individually, but formed a pattern I was too comfortable to see. She asked me once what my parents did, and I told her they had passed, and that my dad had run a small business. She didn't push, which I appreciated at the time. Looking back, the way she nodded felt rehearsed, like she already had the answer and was just confirming it. She also started asking about my apartment, whether I owned it or rented, whether I had any investments. She framed it as practical concern, like she was just thinking about our future together, and I bought it completely. But then her mother entered the picture, and that's when the temperature changed. Her mom was a piece of work. I don't say that lightly. The first time I met her, she spent the entire dinner asking me about my career trajectory, my savings habits, and whether I owned or rented. It felt like a job interview, not a family introduction. My girlfriend laughed it off afterward and told me her mom was just old-fashioned and protective. I let it go. But the questions kept coming. Every family gathering, her mom would find a way to steer the conversation toward money. She asked me once if I had any inheritance, and I said my parents left me a little something but nothing major. She nodded like she was filing that information away. Her eyes did this thing, this quick calculation behind the smile, and I remember feeling a chill I couldn't explain. Around the 18-month mark, something happened that should have been my wake-up call. My girlfriend's cousin, who I'd only met twice, casually mentioned at a barbecue that my girlfriend's previous boyfriend had been fairly well off, and that her mom had been devastated when that relationship ended. The cousin caught herself mid-sentence and changed the subject. But the damage was done. I filed that away too. Despite all of this, I proposed. I know. I can already hear you all yelling at your screens. But here's the thing. When it was just the two of us, things were genuinely good. She was warm, present, and made me feel like I mattered. I convinced myself that her mother's behavior was just her mother's problem, not hers. I told myself that every family has that one difficult relative, and that it didn't reflect on the woman I loved. The engagement was short, 4 months. She wanted a big wedding, I wanted something small. We compromised on a medium-sized ceremony and a nice venue. I paid for most of it, which she accepted without much discussion. Her mom, on the other hand, had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the guest list. She pushed hard for a more extravagant event, and even suggested I take out a loan to cover upgrades. I told her firmly that we were sticking to budget, and she gave me this look, this cold, measuring look, and backed off, temporarily. The wedding itself was fine, Beautiful, actually. I stood there watching this woman walk toward me, and I felt genuinely happy. The kind of happy that makes you forget every doubt you've ever had. She looked incredible. And when she reached me at the altar and took my hands, her fingers were trembling. I thought it was nerves. Now I wonder if it was guilt. My father's old business partner was there, sitting quietly in the back row. He was one of the few people who knew the full picture of my finances, and he'd known my father for over 20 years. After the ceremony, while everyone else was drinking champagne and taking photos, he pulled me aside near the parking lot. He told me he hoped I knew what I was doing. There was something in his voice. Not judgment, just concern. The kind of concern that comes from experience. I told him I did. I clapped him on the shoulder and went back to my wedding. I didn't know what I was doing. 3 days after the wedding. That's all it took. 3 days. I came home from a meeting to find my wife and her mother sitting at my dining table. There were papers spread out between them. My wife looked nervous. Her mom looked like a cat that had finally cornered something. Her mother started talking immediately. She said that now that we were family, it was time to have an honest conversation about our future. She said she knew about my father's business. She knew about the trust. She knew the valuation. And she said it was only fair that my wife, her daughter, be given her rightful share now, not later. I remember standing there, with my jacket still on, my keys still in my hand, just staring at the papers on the table. They were draft transfer documents. Someone had actually prepared legal paperwork to transfer a significant portion of the business into my wife's name. Not a prenup discussion, not a conversation about shared finances, actual transfer of ownership documents, drawn up by a lawyer I'd never heard of. I looked at my wife. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her mother kept talking, saying something about how marriages are partnerships and how she had done research and found out exactly how the trust was structured. She said her daughter deserved security, and that I should think of this as proof of my love and commitment. Something inside me went very, very quiet. Not angry, not panicked, just quiet. Like the moment before a storm when everything goes still. I could hear the fridge humming in the kitchen. I could hear traffic outside. Everything became hyper-real, the way it does when your brain is processing something it doesn't want to accept. I asked my wife one question. I asked her how long she had known. She finally looked at me, and the guilt on her face told me everything before she even opened her mouth. She said her mom had found out about 6 months ago. Some digging online, some public records that connected the dots. A conversation with someone who used to work for my father. 6 months. I did the math standing right there in the living room. That meant she knew before the engagement. She knew before the wedding. She knew when we were tasting cakes and picking out suits and writing vows. She walked down that aisle, knowing exactly what I was worth and exactly what her mother was planning. Every kiss, every whispered promise, every time she told me she loved me during those 6 months, all of it was contaminated. Her mother cut in and told me not to be dramatic, that this was standard in wealthy families, and that I should be grateful someone was helping my wife advocate for herself. She actually used the word grateful, like I should thank them for the ambush, like I should feel lucky that they were willing to take my family's legacy off my hands. I picked up the papers, looked at them for about 10 seconds, and then I put them back down. I told them both that I needed to step outside to make a phone call. Her mother smiled, clearly thinking I was calling to arrange the transfer. My wife still couldn't look at me. I walked out to the driveway and called my lawyer. Not just any lawyer. The attorney who had managed my father's trust for over a decade. The man who had structured every asset, every holding, every protection, specifically for situations like this. I told him what had just happened. There was a long pause, and then he told me he'd have something ready by morning. Update 1. The next morning was surgical. My lawyer arrived at my apartment at 8 a.m. with a paralegal and a folder thicker than anything her mother had brought. My wife was still asleep. Her mother had gone back to the hotel, probably dreaming about her new lifestyle. I sat at the same dining table where they'd ambushed me the night before. And for the next hour, my lawyer walked me through every layer of protection my father had built. He wasn't just a good businessman. He was a strategist. He'd watched friends lose half of everything in messy divorces. He'd seen partners get blindsided by in-laws with expensive attorneys. So years before I ever met this woman, he had his lawyer set up something airtight. The trust was structured as a dynasty trust, meaning it was specifically designed to be protected from divorce claims, creditor actions, and exactly the kind of predatory transfer these people were attempting. My personal assets were legally separate from the trust. Even the salary I drew from the company was routed through a structure that limited marital claims. There were layers upon layers, like a financial fortress with redundant walls. My father had built this not because he was paranoid, but because he had seen too many colleagues. I asked my lawyer about annulment. He told me that given the timeline and the evidence of premeditated financial fraud, I had a strong case. Marrying someone under false pretenses with the intention of extracting assets is not exactly a gray area. He also told me something that made my stomach drop. He'd done a quiet background check overnight and found out that her mother had a history. 2 prior lawsuits involving financial disputes with former partners, a bankruptcy filing from 8 years ago, and a restraining order from the family of her daughter's ex-boyfriend, the well-off one her cousin had mentioned. Apparently, the mother had tried something similar with him, and his family had shut it down hard. That was why that relationship ended. My wife walked into the living room around 9 a.m., saw the lawyer, and froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told her calmly that I knew everything. The timeline, the plan, her mother's history. I told her that the trust was untouchable, and that the documents her mother had prepared were worthless. And then, I told her I was filing for annulment. She broke down, started crying, saying she loved me, that her mother had pressured her, that she never wanted it to go this far. She told me between sobs that her mother had threatened to cut her off entirely if she didn't go along with the plan. She said she had been trapped, that I didn't understand what it was like growing up with a mother like that. That she had wanted to tell me so many times, but couldn't find the courage. She'd begged me to give her a chance to explain, to go to counseling, to start over. Part of me, the part that had stood at that altar 3 days ago, the part that had imagined building a life with this person, wanted desperately to believe her. I could see the tears were real. The fear in her eyes was real. But then I thought about all those months of her knowing. All those moments where she could have warned me, could have told her mother to back off, could have chosen me over the scheme. Every single day for 6 months, she woke up next to me and chose to keep the secret. She watched me plan a wedding that was really just a setup. She let me believe in something that was already hollow. She didn't protect me. Not once. I told her she had until the end of the day to collect her things. My voice didn't shake when I said it, but something inside my chest did. Update 2. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Her mother called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that started sweet and turned threatening over the course of a few hours. First, she was sorry for the misunderstanding. Then she was explaining that I had taken things out of context. Then, she was telling me I'd regret this. By the last voicemail, she was threatening to go public, to tell everyone I was a fraud, to ruin my reputation. My lawyer sent her a cease and desist within 2 hours. Included in the letter was a clear outline of the legal consequences she would face if she continued. Harassment charges, potential fraud charges for the forged transfer documents, and a civil suit for attempted asset theft. She went quiet after that. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, tried a different approach. She sent me a long message to a mutual friend. She admitted that her mother had orchestrated everything from the beginning. She said her mom had identified me as a target after overhearing something at a social event about my family's business. The entire relationship had been a long play. Her mother had coached her on how to act, what to say, even what to wear. She said she had genuinely developed feelings for me along the way, but that the original plan had always been financial. Reading that message was like swallowing glass, because part of it made terrible, perfect sense. Everything snapped into focus like one of those optical illusions, where you suddenly see the second image hidden inside the first. The way she'd been so perfectly calibrated to what I wanted. Low maintenance, easygoing, never materialistic. The way she never pushed about money, never suggested expensive restaurants, never hinted at wanting more. The way she seemed so understanding about my modest lifestyle, my old car, my small apartment. It wasn't trust, it was strategy. It wasn't patience, it was discipline. She was easygoing because her mother told her that easygoing was the approach most likely to work on someone like me. Someone who had grown up humble, despite the wealth. Someone who would be suspicious of a woman who asked about money, but would fall hard for one who never mentioned it at all. I spent a whole night thinking about specific moments. The time she suggested we stay in and cook instead of going out for our anniversary. Was that genuine? Or was it calculated to make her seem different from every other woman? The time she told me she didn't care about material things, that she just wanted someone real. Was that her? Or was that a script her mother had written? I'll never know for sure, and that's the part that eats at you. Not the anger, the not knowing which moments were real and which were performance. The mutual friend who delivered the message looked sick when I read it. They told me they had no idea. That they felt terrible for introducing us. I told them it wasn't their fault. How could they have known? I didn't even know, and I was sleeping next to this woman every night. The annulment process moved fast. Given the evidence of fraud, the court didn't drag its feet. My lawyer presented the timeline, the documents, the background check on the mother, and the admission my wife had made to our mutual friend. It was clean. The marriage was annulled within 6 weeks. Update 3. 3 months have passed since all of this happened, and I'm writing this because someone in a support group I started attending suggested it might help to get it out. After the annulment was finalized, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I sat down with my father's old business partner, the one who'd been at the wedding, and had a long, honest conversation. He told me that he'd had a bad feeling about the whole thing, but didn't want to overstep. He said my father would have spotted it immediately, and he was probably right. My dad had a sixth sense for people who wanted something from him. I clearly didn't inherit that particular skill. I also upgraded my security, both physical and financial. My lawyer added additional layers to the trust structure and set up monitoring for any attempts to access my financial information. I changed my address, changed my phone number, and tightened my social media to essentially nothing. It felt extreme, but after what happened, extreme felt necessary. About a month after the annulment, I heard through the grapevine that her mother had moved on to a new target, some guy in real estate who her daughter had conveniently started seeing. I debated warning him. In the end, I had my lawyer send an anonymous letter to his business attorney with just the public record. The lawsuits, the bankruptcy, the restraining order. What he does with that information is his business. My ex tried to contact me once more, about 2 months after it was all finalized. She sent me an email. How she got my new email, I still don't know. Asking if we could talk. She said she missed me. She said she'd cut ties with her mother. She said she was getting help. I didn't respond. Not because I'm cruel, but because I finally understood something my father tried to teach me, and I was too young to grasp. He used to say that when someone shows you who they are through their actions, the words they use afterward don't matter. She had months to show me who she was. She chose silence and complicity every single time. These days, I'm back to my routine. I go to the office. I run the business my father built. I come home to a quiet apartment that used to feel lonely, and now just feels safe. The grief I feel isn't really about her. It's about the version of the relationship I thought I had. I mourn the lie, not the person. Some nights, I sit in the same chair where my father used to read, and I talk to him in my head. I tell him he was right. I tell him I'm sorry it took me this long to understand. And I tell him the business is fine, the trust held, and his son is still standing. Some people have asked me if I regret keeping my wealth a secret. Honestly, no. If anything, this experience proved why my father was right. The secrecy didn't cause the betrayal, it revealed it. If I had been open about the money from the start, the outcome would have been the same. It would have just moved faster. I'll date again eventually, probably. But next time, the walls stay up until someone earns the key. And my father's trust, the legal one and the philosophical one, stays exactly where it is, protected. For anyone out there who inherited something and feels guilty about guarding it, don't. The people who deserve to be in your life won't ask you to prove it with a check. Edit. For those asking, yes, the cease and desist held. Her mother never went public. Threatening someone with exposure doesn't work very well when your own record is worse than anything you could make up about them. My lawyer earned every penny.